Hello folks, the last few weeks have felt like we've been in a bit of a lull when it comes to major news from Blizzard, but I have a suspicion that that may be about to change. It's been a bit of an open secret for a few weeks that patch 11.05 was likely to launch around or just before October 22nd, and with that date coming ever closer, this week we got confirmation with Blizzard formally announcing that the patch would indeed drop on the 22nd in North America or 23rd in the EU. This patch is dominated by World of Warcraft's 20th anniversary event, which was also confirmed as running from the release of the patch through to January the 6th. This patch brings a revamped anniversary area, now moved to just outside the Caverns of Time, with a host of new minigame events, a new raid based in Blackrock Depths, and the introduction of a new vanilla Timewalking. Blizzard also shared the schedule for the new Guest Relations event. This event, which is based upon the successful Secrets of Azeroth event from last year, will take place in 2 waves, starting from October the 28th and November the 4th. I have a full video covering the new anniversary event, which will be releasing on Monday. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure to hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon, so that you get notified when that releases. While it's no surprise that the anniversary event is running for a much longer period than the usual events, I do find the timing kinda interesting. This patch is launching 8 weeks after the full release of The War Within, and the Warcraft developers have hinted in interviews that they plan to continue the 8-week cycle that we also saw in Dragonflight. Counting 8 weeks from the 22nd takes us to December the 17th, but with that being a week before the dev team likely wrap up for the Christmas break, it's probably not an ideal time to be releasing a new patch. With the event ending on January the 6th, the following day, January the 7th, is probably the first day after the holiday season that you could expect a new patch to drop. As it happens, encrypted developer builds of patch 11.07 have been spotted, so is the 7th the release date for the patch? Well, your guess is as good as mine. But if the team follow their usual pattern, we can likely expect an announcement of what will be in that patch a week or two after 11.05 releases. And with a patch 11.05 being the last entry in the 2024 roadmap, I also just wonder when or if we'll see the 2025 roadmap. With the new patch adding vanilla Timewalking along with a bunch of new rewards, including 3 mounts, there's going to be plenty of things to spend Timewalking badges on. If you're not someone who's already got a stockpile ready, then there's some potentially bad news. With this week's Wrath of the Lich King Timewalking came the announcement of nerfs to the drop rates for Timewalking badges. While the first Timewalking dungeon you do will continue to reward 500 badges, for your alts, this reward will drop to 200. This is also the case for the quest to do the Timewalking raid, which while rewarding 500 on your first character, for alts will now only drop 300. The developers did confirm that this is due to the ability to transfer badges between characters, along with some players holding very large stockpiles of existing badges. This wasn't a massive surprise to me, honestly. Being able to combine badges from multiple characters does make it a lot easier to buy the more pricey rewards. But if the concern is players stockpiling, making it harder to get just penalises the players who do not have stockpiles. And I personally have preferred Blizzard solve this by offering more meaningful rewards for long-time players who likely only stockpile for want of anything to spend it all on. Obviously, the new vanilla Timewalking vendor will help for a bit with the stockpiling, but that will only last so long. Staying in the subject of nerfs, and one that's probably gained a lot more surprise and pushback from the community, was the announcement that Zek'vir's Lair no longer contributes to the Vault's open world and Delve Row progress. After the recent nerfs to Zek'vir's difficulty, for those players who could do the encounter, this had become the most efficient way to complete the Delve Row, with the fight taking no more than 5 minutes compared to 15 minutes for a single Delve run. The time saving could be substantial. Unsurprisingly, this change has not gone down with many players, with some going as far to suggest the return of Blizzard's Fun Police. This was a very common complaint back in Legion and BFA times, when the developers often did seem to respond to players finding unusual ways to play the game that were not intended by the designers, with very heavy-handed interventions that felt very disconnected from the player pace. And it's probably understandable that for many of us who played through that era, our initial gut reaction on seeing this change was to see it in much the same light. I know I certainly did. But thinking about it some more, I personally did not find the thought of doing 8 Zek'vir fights a week just to fill out the vault a very appealing prospect. For me, the Zek'vir fight really doesn't feel very repeatable. I had a lot of fun defeating Zek'vir once, but there's really not much to make it interesting to me in the long term. And to be fair to the developers, one and done is very much how they sold it to us. The truth is that Zek'vir probably wasn't ever intended to be repeatable content. But that huge time saving, especially if all you wanted to do was to fill up the vault, meant that it kind of felt wrong to not do it instead of doing, say, 8 bountiful delves. And this makes me think that this change is much more of a case of the developers trying to save us MMO players from ourselves. Overall, I do think that this is probably the right decision from Blizzard, but at the same time, the fact that so many players felt that Zek'vir was the correct way to fill the vault could be a sign that for many of us, the end of delve rewards are not lasting the test of time, and perhaps there is a need for the development team to take a look at those too. The final nerf that I want to cover is one that I think will get a very mixed reaction depending on your playstyle. I'm sure that many of you have been looking with dismay at the cost of many enchants, even in some cases the rank 1 enchants on the auction house. One of the major drivers of this high cost has been the cost of one of the required materials, the Profaned Tinderbox. These have turned out to be very rare, with the main source being a single delve, Nightfall. Blizzard did make a couple of attempts to address this, first by buffing the drop rates and then by adding them to other delves. And while these changes did reduce prices a little, they've still remained very expensive. This week, Blizzard have added the tinderboxes onto the blacksmithing vendors. They are now purchasable by exchanging some of the other reagents that can also drop from delves. With many of the other delve reagents being very common compared to demand, their auction house values could often be lower than even their vendor price. The effect of this change is going to be to drastically increase the supply of tinderboxes, and this has had an immediate impact in the cost of not just the tinderboxes, but everything that required them in order to craft. For people who have been actively farming tinderboxes, this is no doubt bad news. While I personally wasn't doing that farm, I was lucky enough to get 4 tinderboxes from a Nightfall run before all of the nerfs, and that turned into 64k of easy gold, so I can certainly understand the pain for farmers. On the other hand, enchants are, in my opinion, too expensive for many players, and even as a gold maker, I have been finding leveling up blacksmithing very painful due to the inflated costs of some of the materials required for patron orders. I mean, having to spend 20 to 30,000 gold for a single knowledge point was a big no from me. On balance, I do think that a hefty nerf was both required and inevitable for this one item. My hope is that this will release some demand that can feed into other materials, perhaps helping to slow down that steady decline in prices that farmers always experience during expansions. Moving on to more mainstream content, and this week we get the first look at the new system that the developers had previously revealed in interviews, which will effectively nerf the raid over time. Just inside the raid entrance, you'll find an NPC with a repeatable hand-in quest. This quest requires 16 Nerebar finery and will grant you a stack of severed strands. You get 1 Nerebar finery per raid boss up to a maximum of 8 per week, meaning that it will take 2 weeks to get 1 stack of the buff, which will award a 3% damage and healing buff. Both the currency, the cap and the buff are shared account wide. It's not 100% clear how many stacks we will eventually get of this new buff. The developers did suggest a 20% cap in an interview, but that does not align with the 3% steps. That said, a typical raid season lasts 5 to 6 months, so it's most likely, I think, going to land somewhere in the 21 to 30% range. The other piece of news from the raid is that the Mythic Raid BoEs are available from this week. Following the pattern of a mere result, the developers had made Mythic Raid trash gear drops bind on pickup for the first few weeks at the start to inhibit the impact of BoE farming. With this change, it's likely that Mythic BoE farms will now be kicking off in earnest. Something that has been generating a lot of discussion in the community of late is the state of Mythic Plus. This seems to have been suffering a bit of a perfect storm, with the new affix system creating wider gaps between some key levels than we are used to, particularly at Mythic Plus 7, 10 and 12. Add in changes to gear progression, with gilded crests dropping from plus 9s instead of 6s, and myth track gear from a plus 10 instead of an 8, along with the normal increased difficulty we see in a first season, and many players are finding it harder to achieve the levels of progress that they have been used to, with complaints of increased toxicity, frustration, and some even considering unsubbing from the game. Speaking personally, this season has felt a lot more challenging than in the past, and I'm not convinced that it feels rewarding enough for those challenges. For me, the biggest issue is that the designers have clearly increased the gaps between keys at all levels. Like many players, I was surprised by the lack of difficulty in both Heroic Dungeons and Mythic 0 during the pre-season, with both very much feeling like they had regressed back to the pre-Dragonflight Season 4 levels. Combined with the new affixes raising the difficulty of a plus 12 substantially, and it seems to have stretched the entire tier out, creating a situation where even plus 2ing a key at any given level does not guarantee being able to even deplete the key at the next level up. Overall, this has made Mythic Plus more grindy and less fun, in my opinion. And this is an enormous shame, as the new dungeon pool is excellent, with even the dreaded Dawnbreaker dungeon unexpectedly landing in quite a decent place, especially compared to the Dragonflight dungeons at launch. Following on from Season 3 of Dragonflight, which was without doubt the best Mythic Plus season ever, this season feels like a massive regression. The War Within got off to the best start of any expansion since Legion, but unless gear or perhaps experience can allow mainstream players to find more enjoyable progression as the season progresses, the reception of Mythic Plus risks wasting this potential. Mythic Plus is arguably the most important bit of content in modern World of Warcraft, and if it's in an unhealthy state, the whole game will likely suffer, and this seems to have prompted the developers to very unusually make some mid-season changes to the reward structures. On Thursday this week, the developers updated the gilded crest to now start dropping from Mythic Plus 8 instead of plus 9, and at the same time they've notably increased the positive impacts of all of the new Xal'atath affixes. Along with this, the plus 12 affix Xal'atath's Guile has been heavily nerfed, with its health and damage increases reduced from 20 to 10%, along with some tuning changes for Necrotic Weight and Stonevault. While these changes are of course very welcome, especially for players at the high end, I don't think they will be enough to address the problems that more mainstream players are having. Getting Gilded Crests at plus 8 will make that feel more rewarding for those players struggling to transition to doing 9s, and potentially help push some of us through with better gear, but it does not address the overly large steps, nor the issue that this plus 7 affix is causing. The good news is that Blizzard have said that they are working on some more adjustments which will follow in the near future. My hope is that these changes this week are more to buy the developers time until they can develop and release some more comprehensive fixes. Let's keep our fingers crossed that they can come up with a solution that works for the Mythic Plus mainstream players. Oh, and Blizzard, that Mythic Plus 7 affix really needs to go. It adds nothing to the gameplay experience except frustration and toxicity. Anyways, let's get back to some more positive news and take a look at the new developments on the PTR. Please be aware that I'm about to discuss some discoveries that may point towards future storylines. It is quite speculative, so it's not really a true spoiler, but even so, if you want to be 100% unspoiled, you may want to skip this section. First up is the discovery of a mysterious NPC called Unknown in Dornagal with a grayed out quest marker. This could be a bug, but it may also be an artifact of Blizzard's quest encryption system, suggesting that there could well be some new questing content to come in the new patch. The NPC does not match the bronze dragonflight aesthetic of the anniversary event, so most likely it's an independent questline. With 1107 still to come, I feel that it may be too early for a continuation of the main campaign, so perhaps this is a new side quest similar to the Bane questlines or the very successful blue dragonflight ones that we saw in Dragonflight. But, you know, your guess is as good as mine. Also added to Dornagal are some new NPCs that have some very interesting conversations as you approach. Skagit and Rickett were part of the Goblin team who found Mechagon, and they are talking about a mysterious crystal that Rickett has found out to sea. Back in the beta, there were some data mine signs at possible more Goblin content to come, perhaps even a Goblin raid, and I do have to wonder if this is Blizzard starting to drop hints about the next season. Along with that, there are also some Arathi who appear to be planning to build an airship base on the surface. Could this be a hint for further down the line of the War Within? Ever since we discovered that there's an Arathi Empire somewhere out there, it's been likely we would eventually visit it, but I'm not sure any of us expected it would be as soon as this expansion. But this is making me seriously wonder if we will be going there sooner rather than later. But what about all of you? What do you think this could mean for the future of the expansion? Or is this just a fun misdirect to nowhere? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this week's episode interesting or useful, then do make sure to let me and the YouTube algorithm know by hitting the like icon. And if you haven't already, then do make sure to subscribe for lots more content from me. Subscribing is by far the best way to support a channel like mine. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.